and welcome to Sharp PR Bites. I'm AJ Sharp, the founder of Sharp, the PR communications agency. We're leading the way with food and drink, hospitality clients. And there's something really on this podcast for everyone looking to enhance their reputation. But this week, I am joined by Claire Pope for the first time, who is our head of clients and content. Hi, Claire.
Hi, AJ.
And Claire Hernandez, who you may remember from some of our past episodes. Welcome back, Claire.
Thank you.
So we are going to talk this morning about ultra-processed foods. And this morning, you just happened to drop into conversation when we were making coffee that you're doing the human being diet.
Yes.
And this is where the whole conversation started from, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. I think it's a diet that's been sort of set out by Petronella Ravenseer, I think is her name. And it's sort of to get you out of that cycle of all those addictive ultra-processed foods and get back to real food.
Amazing. Claire P., what is ultra-processed food?
I think there's lots of ways you can define it. For me, the way I always think about it is if you've got a product which, when you look at the label on the packaging, that's basically got ingredients in that you don't recognise, that aren't in your food cupboard at home, then it's probably ultra-processed. So, things like E-numbers, emulsifiers, that sort of thing.
That's really interesting, because there are some things that sound really dodgy on a label, aren't there, like citric acid, but actually that's just lemon juice, isn't it? So you don't mean things like that.
Yeah, I think so. You might have some lemon juice in your cupboard at home, so that's okay, I think. I think it's just things that you don't recognise that would be used in a manufacturing process rather than something you would create in your own home and be familiar with all of the ingredients.
Okay, so if I was to buy like a chicken breast and to slice it up and dip it in egg and dip it in breadcrumbs to make a kind of Kiev-y thing, I've processed it. Does that count?
Well, I've got to say, I think that's 10 times, 100 times better than buying one, maybe, because at least you've got control over what's going into it. If you made your breadcrumbs out of the freshest bread from the bakery, then that's got to be pretty good, right? Mm. I think that's the answer. I think it's sort of scratch cooking and having more control about what you're putting in your body.
Definitely. And how are you feeling, Claire? Claire with an H.
Well, I've only been doing this for about a week, but yeah, really good. More energy, bit more focus, I would say. Yeah.
What have you had to give up that we wouldn't think of as being ultra processed?
It really takes it back to sort of scratch cooking. Yeah, anything like, for example, bread, I think is a good example. I think a lot of people think that isn't ultra processed, and really it depends obviously where you get your bread from. I don't think many of us have time to make bread ourselves at home.
No, not like the pandemic when we're all making our own bread from starters. Yeah.
But if you're getting it from a bakery, then that's obviously pretty good. If you're buying the sort of long life bread, that's where we're sort of treading into ultra processed territory because it's full of preservatives and things like that.
So it's the kind of stuff that doesn't go hard after, like bread should go hard, shouldn't it? After about 3 days, it should be hard and stale and perfect for breadcrumbs, in fact.
And the fact that it's, the stuff that we're buying is lasting maybe 2 or 3 weeks is great from a sort of reducing waste point of view. But from an ingredients perspective, that's quite alarming, really.
It's an interesting point you make about reducing waste, though. Do you think this, all of us making big efforts to reduce our processed food intake could actually lead to us creating more food waste? Or do you think that there's a whole process there in learning what to do with food when, your bread has gone stale and you can make it into breadcrumbs, but you might not need breadcrumbs that day. So do you freeze that for later?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is about getting back to scratch cooking, isn't it? And we're all leading such busy lives. It's quite difficult to sort of carve that time out to cook from scratch. But I think if you do, I actually think you're less likely to waste food because you've gone to the effort of making it. And like you say, you're going to sort of become a bit more creative with what's in your fridge and you're going to use it up.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think it's quite interesting, actually, what Claire's saying. The flip side of that, of course, is that ultra-processed foods like ready meals, they're a convenience.
Yeah.
You buy them because you're tired, you're in a rush, you just want something quick, you can shove it in the microwave, whatever. And I think that, taking that out of the equation is actually quite difficult. It's about changing habits and And that takes time, right? It takes maybe a bit of education as well. Maybe you need some recipe inspiration.
I agree. I think we've really been sort of suckered into this convenience lifestyle, haven't we? And of course, what they didn't tell us is actually it's all very addictive. So getting out of that cycle is quite difficult when your body's craving the sugars and the sort of carbs and things that are in it.
Where do you see the HFSS element kind of intersecting, I suppose, or ending, and the ultra processed food bit starting? Because a lot of the negativity around unhealthy food, for the want of a better phrase, a catch-all phrase, we think of now as being the really high sugar, the things that spike your sugar levels, make you tired later, salt, which we know puts a lot of strain on your heart and your body. But this is another level, isn't it? This is the actual process element of the food.
I think probably my gut would tell me that the link between those is they overlap, definitely. HFSS products are part of the ultra-processed set, if you like. Then the ultra-processed set also includes some other stuff, potentially. So I think that the interesting thing about that, when you start to think of it like that, is, you know, what's the solution? Is it that we should be taxing these kinds of foods?
I don't know. Do you remember going to see Henry Dimbleby speak about the National Food Strategy? And he was absolutely fascinating and terrifying in equal measures, as he was kind of laying out what we can probably expect to see from people over the next 100 years if we continue to eat in the way that we have. The other element, which I don't think went down marvellously with the government, was how, if we actually look back historically over time, every time every time the government has taxed or got massively involved in controlling what people should and shouldn't eat, with the whole kind of saturated fat debate of the 80s or 70s and 80s, which got everyone to stop eating pure butter and eat margarine, a very ultra-processed food, and how actually, if you look at the stats, our health got significantly worse when they interfered with that.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a massive backlash on that now, and that's become clear with the sort of whole milk story that we're seeing in the news. Plant-based milks still have their place, but I think people are appreciating the nutrient value in whole milk once again.
Are you referring to the oat milk sugar spike article that
Yes.
theme that came out?
Yes.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. I felt awful about that. I give my kids oat milk. My daughter is lactose intolerant. She's had oat milk for a long time. And I do give her extra vitamin D because I know that that's really important. But she drinks oat milk for breakfast every day. And apparently that's giving her a massive sugar spike.
Yeah, it's so tough, isn't it? I think particularly as a parent, because you're being given all of this information and actually some of it's conflicting. And so you're having to sort of reevaluate all the time. Is this the right thing? You know, should I be going back to this? Yeah, I think it's an evolving discussion for sure.
Do you think consumers understand it?
Well, there is a stat from Mintel that says 70% of consumers try to avoid ultra-processed foods. I'm slightly sceptical about that, because I think, in my mind, I think it would be lower than that, although that apparently that is lower than our European counterparts, who we know are really good at, you know, eating the Mediterranean diet and, you know, really unprocessed food.
Is that because they're naturally already doing it? It's not such an issue for them to discuss it, do you think?
I think it all goes back to a bit what Claire was saying, you know, some of these habits we develop growing up. If you're used to being fed more ultra-processed food, that's what you develop the taste for. And literally your body becomes addicted to that. So it becomes very hard to break that cycle. Whereas, you know, in some of the European countries, we see the different diets. And obviously, if you've been brought up eating that way, it's going to be a lot easier for you to maintain
and in
that.
a lot of those countries, mealtime is sacrosanct, and it often takes many hours to put together that meal. Over here, I don't think we sort of value that time enough. We're not taking the time to prepare our meals, to sit down together as a family, perhaps as much as we used to.
And I think we're the worse for it. I mean, I'm probably the most guilty person for exactly that. I'm going at 100 miles an hour. I'm trying to fit in everything.
I think we all are. I think it's modern lives, isn't it?
Yeah, the kids are often fed something that comes out of a pack that's easy, that I can just throw in the oven or whatever. I mean, I've just eaten a ready meal for my lunch today. It's not ideal. And I would consider myself to be fairly well informed about food, yet I'm still not doing it. And I think it's coming down to convenience. I mean, I suppose the question here is, where does the responsibility lie? Obviously, with the individual, we choose what we put into our bodies. We choose what we put into our families' bodies. But is there a responsibility from governmental level? Is it the manufacturers? Is it the food companies? Like, where do you think the responsibility for this needs to come from?
I think that responsibility needs to be shared, right? Probably my first port of call would be the government. I do think that people need to be better educated. And if they're not taxing and they're not controlling what people do, which is maybe not the right thing to do, you know, they should be feeding out information, doing more research into this kind of thing and studies. And then I think also manufacturers, brands have a responsibility to make products that are good for people, right? Good for the planet, good for people. And then, you know, the individual too. If that all worked together and we came together, then maybe we'd be in a better place.
I would just add to that retailers as well. I think they can be held responsible. You know, it's the buyers that are choosing what goes onto the shelves. And we know from the job that we're in, some of the amazing products that are out there and available to buyers. I'd really like to see them choosing better. And I would also say that schools, I think, could play a bigger part in educating children on diet. I think it's getting better from what I've seen with my children, but I think there's still more work to be done there.
Agree. I do think education in schools has got better. And I like hearing my kids say things to me like, oh, you know I need to eat my 5 fruit and veg a day, or more than that, though. I know I need to eat protein because that's how we build strong bodies. And I know I need to, you know, that's really unhealthy, Mummy, when I'm opening a bag of crisps on a Friday.
My 12-year-old knows that, but he still will choose the packet of crisps over the banana.
Of course, just like we will.
Yeah, most of the time.
Yeah. I think there's psychology, isn't there, in your food choice. You know, if you're having a bad day, if you're tired, you're going to reach for that chocolate bar, right, instead of the apple in the fruit bowl. And I think that's something we're all battling.
Well, we're programmed to, aren't we? We're, as humans, you know, obviously our history dates back to the cave era when, you know, food was scarce and we were looking for the highest energy possible food. And so we're driven to
gorge ourselves on it.
Yeah, when the harvest is there, make the most of it because you don't know what's around the corner.
Yeah, fatten up, ready for the lean periods.
Yeah.
But of course, they never expected, evolutionary process, didn't expect food to become so widely available, so easily, and so highly processed that there is little to no effort have to be put in to consume. We don't have to go on a hunt. We don't have to climb a rock face to get the honey at the top. We don't have to do the things that our ancestors would have had to do to achieve food. We don't have to build the fire and collect the wood. We literally open the pack and consume what could be an entire day's worth of calories in one go.
Yeah, and with it all being delivered to our doors now as well, all you have to do is get up off the sofa and open the front door and it's there.
It's like that film. Do you remember Wall-E?
Yes.
Where they're all on floating beds. I suppose let's talk about the solution, though, Claire. I mean, there's a lot of different articles that have come out recently, and I think one which we really need to talk about ethically was the article a few days ago in The Guardian, which said, how do you know which ultra-processed foods are better than others? Well, it depends how good their PR is. And I think it made me certainly really think about what that means for us as a PR agency.
Yeah, I mean, I guess as PRs, we have a huge responsibility when we're communicating, you know, ethically to deliver the right messages and, you know, be honest and to advise our clients as well. You know, if we think there's an issue with a product, then we need to be open and honest and feedback.
And I actually think we have relatively few products on our roster that would actually be considered as ultra processed. We have some alcohol brands, and obviously they're not healthy, little in moderation. But I think it's a really interesting debate about these double standards. It was an article, I've just found it now, by Giles Yeo. I think it is quite a big discussion about the PR around it. He asserts things like 50% of our calories are from ultra-processed foods, but some of them we're actually quite pleased to be eating. We think that they're good for us because they've had really great marketing and PR messaging around them. And I think that's where we need to be really ethically aware of not making false claims and not alluding to health benefits that aren't actually there at all.
Which I think, you know, as an agency, Sharp are we're very good at that, and you know we give honest consultation with our clients, and we're very aware, aren't we, of
We are,
the impact.
and I think
of doing-
we're very careful about the messaging and what we're issuing to media, because we know that really influences them.
Part of the solution is, how can we recognise ultra-processed food? We've talked about whether, you know, turning over the pack and checking the ingredients. Is there any other ways that we can recognise ultra-processed foods? I mean, for example, if something doesn't look like its original ingredients, like the example from the beginning of the chicken, can you still see the chicken? Can you still see that it looks like chicken, or does it look like kind of chicken soup?
Yeah, I suppose there's certain times when you dig into something and you think, oh, the texture's not quite what you're expecting, so that might be a good indicator. And I guess sometimes your palate just tells you, doesn't it, when you eat a ready meal, that it's just way too salty. Or
So the worst ultra-processed foods would be things like bread, breakfast cereal, cereal bars, flavoured yogurts, fruit drinks, milk drinks, baby food. Wow.
Yeah, I think just going back to what you were saying about looking at how some of these products are marketed, I think some of the most alarming products are ones that almost claim to be healthy. For example, yogurts. You know, when they say they're zero fat, people are, I believe, they are picking them up and buying them thinking that they're actually good for their body. But what's actually happening is the fat is actually replaced with sweeteners and all sorts of things to try and make it taste better, because if you strip all of that fat out, it's going to be, you know, really runny and not taste great. So they're actually having to replace that with something. It's a bit worrying, I think.
The concept then is that you've thinned it out. You've thinned out all this sort of fat, the substance, the protein that makes you feel full. So you end up eating 3 or 4 of them rather than just having one full fat, pure, natural yogurt, maybe with a little bit of honey in it or something like that, where these are 2 ingredients, you know what they are, you know what process that yogurt has to go through, and it's very minimal comparative to, you know, a processed yogurt or something, and eating it in its pure form.
yeah, no, I think that's a really valid point, actually. I think in our household, that's kind of what we've tried to do, is go strip back and go back to the simple things. So, you know, instead of having lots of flavoured yogurts, as you say, in the fridge, we have, you know, Greek yogurt. So we'll have that with some honey or some fruit, or we'll cook some muffins from scratch and put some banana in and a little bit of sugar. But, you know what's gone into it. So you're kind of, that's a great way, I think, of circumventing it. And you know, if that becomes part of your weekly routine, maybe you have a little bake-off on a Sunday afternoon. I mean, it's literally half an hour, you know, for some simple recipes. And I think it can really work.
I think that's a really good point. I think there's also a point that we were discussing before we came on air earlier, which was about the cost of it, though. And, you know, we're lucky that we can buy the ingredients and make something from scratch. But actually, you were saying for many families,
Yes.
the really highly processed food is often the cheap food, isn't it?
Yes, and I think it's really interesting. You know, when you look at that sort of map of life expectancy throughout the country, you can see that places that are a little poorer, the life expectancy isn't so good. And I think that's a classic indicator that these people are not able to afford the best possible food for their bodies. And, you know, I know from experience that, you know, if I want to eat a lot of vegetables on my plate, if I want to buy the best, that's going to cost me a lot more than buying something else.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we know that, for example, beef that comes from cattle that have been fed on corn and grain and things like that are not as good as pasture-fed cattle. They're like significant difference in omega oils in the food that's then produced. The same is so with fish that have been farmed versus fish that have been caught wild. The difference in the nutritional benefit of those 2 products, it's not just a sort of label, oh, I eat organic, check me out. It's much more about the nutritional benefit of the end product. And of course, those line caught salmon and those, you know, pasture fed cattle and all the rest of it, they are very, very prohibitively expensive. And you know, if you're then struggling to actually feed your family, I mean, it's not even on the same radar. It's you are forced to feed your children, your family, what you can afford, which unfortunately is the really highly processed end of the market.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also with the addictive nature to it as well, you're sort of perpetuating this cycle.
You're stuck in a catch-22.
Yeah.
So I suppose the argument is we need the provision of better, less processed food at every single price point. And somebody somewhere has got to take responsibility for that. I mean, one of the cheapest ways I've found to eat is actually eating from the local community. And everyone says, oh, farm shops are really expensive. They're not. Like, I think it's really interesting how much better it is to eat from local farm shops and local butchers and have less, but have better.
And I suppose some places do these kind of odd fruit and veg boxes, don't they? You know, with the slightly ugly fruit and veg, which are a bit cheaper. And I mean, some of the schemes that people like Tesco have done where they give away a piece of fruit when you're shopping. You can give it to your toddler in the trolley or whoever's hungry. Things like that are great. You know, they're a start. They're a step in the right direction. But yeah, more of that.
Some of the sort of root veg, like, you know, swede and turnips, are not as expensive as, you know, the avocados.
Yep.
If we go back to sort of making stews using things like lentils, it can make it go a bit further. So there are sort of smarter ways to live that way.
Absolutely. I eat the best, and I'm not doing this at the moment. I'm definitely a guilty party of eating processed food, whether it's ultra or not, I'm not sure. But is if you do get a veg box, and it's usually about 15 quid for, you know, a family of four's veg for the week, you end up with loads of veg. Funny old thing that. But actually, what you end up doing is just dicing it up and roasting it and just chucking it in and using it in your salads and using it in wherever, because you're just going, oh, I don't want to waste it now. I'm just going to have to cook it. And it's so filling and it's so delicious. And when you've made something really delicious out of what is a few different, you know, an onion, a couple of bits of root veg and a bit of cheese on the top or something, and it's absolutely delicious. And you're thinking, do you know what? That probably costs about 50p.
Yeah, and it forces you to be creative, and I think you'll be less likely to waste it as well.
And they do say preparing food, doing things with your hands, with the tips of your fingers, actually makes you happier. Oh. How good's that? Thank you so much. That was really, really helpful and really interesting to hear. So thank you both of you, Claire Pope and Claire Hernandez, for joining us in the studio today.
Thank you.
Thanks, AG.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Sharp PR Bites. I hope you found our insights valuable. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay in the loop, then please do subscribe on your favourite platform and interact with us. Get in touch. You can email us on hello@sharprelations.com, or you can just interact with us on any of our social media channels, which are @sharprelations. Thanks so much for joining us.